Well, there is a big stigma inside of churches, religious communities, when it comes to mental health and mental illness. Things like you just need to pray more, you just need to read your Bible more, you just need to pull yourself up from your bootstraps. Those are the kind of things that I've heard for a long, long time. And we want to be a part of a conversation these last 3 weeks to tell a counter story, to speak back to that stigma, to destigmatize, to open up the conversation about mental health and about mental illness. Because this is what I believe to be true. If there's one place on planet Earth where it should be okay for you not to be okay, if there's one place on planet Earth where we don't have to clean ourselves up and act like we have it more together than we actually do, if there's one place on Earth where we need to be able to speak about the darknesses and the pains and the traumas that we've experienced in life, it should be the church of Jesus, right? This should be a place where it's okay not to be okay, where there are no perfect people allowed, and we all walk in need of help, of salvation, of hope from outside of ourselves. And so that's why I'm so passionate about having this conversation about our mental matters, because I believe that your mental health matters to God. God wants you to thrive and be whole, not only in a spiritual way, but in your mind as well. And so we want to open up these conversations. A couple guiding principles that we have in this series. We'll put this up on the screen. We said this last week. Nope. There we go. Mental illness is a signal. It's not a sin. Mental illness is like all the lights on the dashboard going off, saying that something is off kilter, something is not correct. It is not a commentary on your spirituality. It's not saying that you have a broken connection with your heavenly Father through Jesus. No, it's saying that there is something that you've experienced, something that's going on in your mind that is not whole. It's a signal, not a sin. I said it this way again last week as well. Next slide. Yep. Mental illness is more of a comment on your chemistry or your life's challenges than your Christianity. Mental illness is more a comment on maybe something that is chemically not imbalanced or something that because of the adverse life experiences and challenges that you've had. It's more a comment on those things than it is your faith, your trust in Jesus, your spirituality. So I hope you hear that, and I hope that you have a little bit of hope this morning. If you feel beaten down, if you feel like there's something wrong with you and inherently broken inside of you and your faith, man, I want to speak a different story into you, that you are so loved and you are not alone. You are not alone. Last week we talked about anxiety, something that's plaguing the Western world, particularly America, in numbers that we've never seen before. And today we're going to talk about another one of those elements of mental illness that is often hush, hush, don't talk about. But here at Bridgeway, we're just going to go there because that's what we do. I'm a glutton for punishment, I guess. We're going to talk about depression. And I know you're rolling out of bed this morning going I can't wait to go to church and we're going to talk about depression. It's something so exciting. But this is something that we need to talk about. Because if the church and people of faith in Jesus are silent, we feel like there is a gap in the conversation that needs to be had. So I want to share with you some things that I've learned over the last couple of months as I've been studying for this series about depression, things that are going on in our culture that should alarm us and speak to the urgency of this conversation and us getting some help. The first stat is this: an estimated 21 million adults in the United States had at least one major depressive episode in the last year. This is a number represented 8.3% of all U.S. adults. I mean, that is a bunch of people in this room if we work that out proportionally. This is something that people are struggling with, at least one major depressive episode in the last year. The next one here talks about the population that it's actually affecting the most. The prevalence of adults with a major depressive episode was highest among individuals aged 18 through 25. Almost 20% of that generation is struggling with at least having one major depressive episode. This is people like end of high school, college, trying to figure out their footing in the world. And if you've got kids in that generation, in that season, you guys know what I'm talking about. This is a challenging time for them mentally. That's who it's affecting the most. But maybe the most alarming statistic that I read was from the Mayo Clinic, talking about just this increase in adults experiencing depression. The percentage of U.S. adults who report having been diagnosed with depression at some point in their life, like having one episode, some point in their life, has reached 29%, which is a lot, right? But it's crazy when you think about the growth that we've seen, nearly 10 percentage points higher than in 2015. I mean, that is a huge increase over the last 8 years. And so this is an emergency that we need to talk about. Now, I think there's a lot of stigmas that come with people that feel depressed. We think that there are certain people that feel depressed because they're on the down. Okay. We'll get that figured out. There we go. We're back. There's a lot of conversation about who experiences depression. We think it's people down and out, people that are low on the socioeconomic scales and things like that. But it really is indiscriminate, depression is, on who it affects. Like, for example, there's celebrities, movie stars, TV stars. This is John Hamm. Right. Yep. There we go. John Hamm from AMC's Mad Men. Like, come on, like, how could he be depressed? He's so handsome. Look at that jawline, right? Like, so handsome. But he experienced a time, and he bravely spoke about a time that he was depressed because of losing his mother about 10, 15 years ago, and he didn't want to get out of bed for weeks on end. Here's another celebrity who experienced depression. Yeah, the boss, Bruce Springsteen. Like, how could he experience depression? Like, look at the thousands of fans that come to his shows. Or this dude wrote Thunder Road, y'all. He wrote Thunder Road. How could he be depressed, right? And some of you guys need to go listen to Thunder Road afterwards. I'm just telling you, it's a great song, one of the best. But he experienced depression when he turned 60, which was like 15 years ago now. But he experienced he didn't want to get out of bed for weeks on end. Here's another example of someone who experienced depression, someone we lost through suicide about 10 years ago now, Robin Williams. I have so many memories growing up of his characters, his voices, and all the joy that he brought us. And weren't we all surprised that depression was something that he struggled with silently for his whole adult life? That ended with him dying from suicide. I mean, it was so tragic, right? And this is indiscriminate to people of socioeconomics or fame or no fame at all, but it's also indiscriminate to people inside the church and outside of the church. And we need to speak into this, right? That Christians can suffer from depression as well. Like, one of the greatest Christian thinkers and authors of the 21st century was C.S. Lewis, Clive Staples Lewis, right? He wrote Chronicles of Narnia. He wrote Mere Christianity, the Screwtape Letters. But he was this brilliant thinker who has shaped so much of my thought and so much Christian thought. But at the same time, he talked about losing his wife after 25 years of marriage, and the grief overtook him to where he was suffocating with depression, didn't want to get out of bed for months and months and months. He actually wrote a powerful work about it that you should check out sometime if you're struggling with grief, called A Grief Observed, about his experience with depression and that loss. But it happens to people that are followers of Jesus and are not followers of Jesus. It's indiscriminate to this at all. And there's like many symptoms of depression. This can manifest itself in so many different ways. Just to read a laundry list just for a moment of the different things that compile into medical depression. Feelings of sadness, tearfulness, emptiness, or hopelessness, angry outbursts, irritability, or frustration, even over small matters, loss of interest or pleasure in most of all normal activities, even sex, hobbies, and sports, sleep disturbances, including insomnia or sleeping too much, tiredness and lack of energy. So even small tasks take extra effort, trouble thinking, concentrating, brain fog, making decisions, and actually remembering things, frequent or recurrent thoughts of death, suicidal thoughts, or suicide attempts. These are all things that can be a symptom of feeling clinically depressed. And there's so many different reasons that lead us there. This is not just you're a sad person or you had something sad happen. I mean, we need to take in stock, and I think it's important inside of a church we speak to this, that there are biological, physiological reasons why people suffer from depression. There's a chemical imbalance. Something inside of your physiological self is off kilter and out of whack. Somebody who might experience chronic pain to where every day is a challenge and you're feeling pain, that can lead you to depression. Hormonal changes like having a child can lead you to going into a depressive state. There are biological causes for this. There's also other causes, though, relational causes. I heard someone say once, the quality of your relationships will determine the quality of your life. And so when there's relational trauma, depression can take root. When you have a terrible breakup or you go through a divorce, like that is relational trauma that can cause you to be depressed. If you are in a state of worrying about your children so much that you're neglecting your own health and you are obsessed with worrying about your children and their lives, it can lead us to depression. Or like dealing with effects of isolation from a global pandemic. Nobody went through that, right, at all, right? But these are things that can affect us relationally and move us towards being in a depressive state. But there's also circumstantial causes, like the seasons changing. Like some of you guys were smiling a lot more a couple weeks ago when it was like 65 degrees on a Sunday, right? Seasonal effectiveness disorder, that's a real thing and it affects us on a sliding scale. Life transitions, like retirement. You think it's going to be the greatest thing ever because you can just golf and drink beer all day, and then like 2 weeks in, you're like, this is miserable. I need a purpose, right? That can be a part of it. Or empty nesting, when your kids leave the house and you lose some of that purpose of being a parent. Or financial stress, to where you're worried that you don't have as much money as you have month over and over again, and you don't know what steps to take forward. Those can all be circumstantial causes for us feeling depression. And so we know some of the symptoms, we know some of the causes, and we know how it affects a wide group of people. But something that is so tragic to me, that this affects so many people that God loves and that we love in our relational circles. But the tragedy comes in the fact that many people of faith, we don't speak about these things, or we hush these things, or we just say, read your Bible more, pray more, you should go to church more, which I guess I'm all for all three of those things. I don't care who knows it, but I don't think they're a solution to everything. And the reality is that many heroes of the faith, many sheroes of the scriptures experience depression. The Bible's not silent on these issues. And we should find solace in that. And we should find solidarity in the human experience, because the Bible doesn't like take an eraser to these stories when they could have. They're on the pages for us to know that we are not alone. For example, there's some mighty people in the Old Testament, the Hebrew scriptures, who struggled with depression. I want to run us through a couple of these examples. Elijah, who was a prophet, and a prophet not being like a divine fortune teller of the future, but a prophet being like a mouthpiece for God, someone who's going to speak truth to the power structures, both politically and in the religious elite systems as well, saying this is not the way that God's designed it to be. And so Elijah is one of those mighty prophets in the Old Testament long before Jesus. And he actually has this huge showdown between himself and these prophets of this lowercase g God named Baal, where God shows up in a miraculous way and rescues Elijah and shows those false prophets to be false prophets. Like a mountaintop experience, you think Elijah's on top of the world. And he is, until he realizes that the evil queen Jezebel has now put a bounty on his head because of the miracle that he was a part of. And Elijah finds himself on the run, wondering if God's going to provide for him, if God's going to take care of him, if he's actually the right thing. Was he hearing God or was he just hearing voices? All these things come into his life, and he finds himself in a state of depression. And the scriptures don't hide this. They spell it out. 1 Kings 19, verses 4 and 5, we're told this. He came to a broom bush and sat down under it and prayed that he might die. I have had enough, Lord. Take my life. I am no better than my ancestors. Then he laid down under the bush and fell asleep. And that just depressed, I don't want to do anything but fall asleep. This is a mighty man of God having a terrible bout of depression. He's a prophet. He's just been part of a miracle. But he speaks up. He speaks to God and says, this is how I feel. And it's raw. He says, I want to die. Like, just a little bit of a side note here. Do you know that God desires your honesty more than your being polite? You can be real with God. He's big enough for your deepest, darkest prayers, sentences, words. And Elijah shows us that in this moment. So he's feeling depressed because of him being on the run, feeling like God has abandoned him. There's another person in the Old Testament scriptures by the name of Job. It looks like Job, but the people that are smarter than me say we should say Job, so I'm going with that, right? But Job had this incredible life, and through these unique circumstances, he lost everything. And like everything, his wife, his 10 children, his health, his wealth, everything had been stripped away from Job. And so Job gets real and raw and honest about what's going on in his mental matters. And he says this in Job chapter 3, starting in verse 24. For sighing has become my daily food. My groans pour out like water. These are not Taylor Swift lyrics. These are scriptures, right? What I feared has come upon me. What I dreaded has happened to me. I have no peace, no quietness. I have no rest, but only turmoil. He's processing loss and life change in an unimaginable way as he's lost everything. And he finds himself in this moment feeling depressed, having turmoil in his mind and no rest, no peace, no quietness. And then there's another prophet in the Old Testament by the name of Jeremiah. And Jeremiah was a prophet that many biblical scholars, they give him this moniker of being the weeping prophet. He's the sad guy. He's the sad trombone of the prophets in the Old Testament because he's usually bringing bad news. But there's a reason that he's called the weeping prophet, and he always has these sad stories to tell. It's because he is a child of trauma. He's someone who experienced a unique and powerful traumatic event that would make us go into a dark room for the rest of our lives and just cry our eyes out. You see, Jeremiah was a prophet of God's people, again, being a mouthpiece, speaking truth to power, and he's working near the temple, Solomon's temple in Jerusalem. We have an artist depiction of what this temple looks like. And for 400 years, this temple stood as this tribute to God and his holiness and his power, as sort of the centerpiece of all of the Israelites and their worship and their civic life. It was an ornate, massive ordeal. For 400 years, it stood there until 587 BC when the Babylonian Empire ransacked Jerusalem and destroyed the temple. And hear me, they destroyed the temple with hundreds of priests and other people inside of it still working. And Jeremiah witnessed that. He witnessed his friends, his co-workers, probably family members, perish at the hands of a brutal act of war that destroyed Solomon's temple. Now, it was in this moment he experienced what I believe we would all say, traumatic stress, post-traumatic stress syndrome. And he is in this dark place because of what he experienced, and he experienced depression. There's this small book in the Old Testament, if you want to feel really sad, check it out. It's called Lamentations, and where there's just poetry of Jeremiah just pouring out his heart about the destruction of the temple and how they don't think God is like there the way he used to be, or wondering what they did wrong. And we actually see Jeremiah pour out his heart and his depressed mind in verse 16 of chapter 1. Jeremiah says, "This is why I weep," not just cry, I weep, "and my eyes overflow with tears. No one is near to comfort me. Listen, no one to restore my spirit. My children are destitute because the enemy has prevailed." You see the definite, ultimate reality of what Jeremiah was feeling in his mind. Like, I'm weeping, my eyes are just overflow with tears. No one, there's no hope at all. The enemy has prevailed. Like, the story's over. That's what Jeremiah was feeling because the trauma that he experienced, he was depressed. And he was a mighty mouthpiece of God. He's got 2 books of the Bible, you guys. Hear me. The scriptures do not hide these bouts and these seasons of mental illness for the heroes and the sheroes of the faith. Hear me. I don't think we should either. I think we need to bring sunlight to them so that God can do work in and through the pain that we are experiencing in our minds so that we can walk towards wholeness. So what we did last week, instead of me way overshooting my expertise and giving advice that I'm not qualified to give, we're going to have another conversation with a mental health professional from our community. His name is Noah Sakalo, MALMHCNCC, got all those letters in there. He is a licensed mental health counselor providing counseling services here in Kokomo. He's worked at Community Health Network downtown in mental health capacity since 2018, and he's currently pursuing a doctorate in counselor education and supervision. So would you guys welcome up Noah as he speaks to us this morning? Thanks so much, man. Round 2.
Yeah, let's do it.
It's just been so great getting to know you over the last month or so as we've been talking about this. And so we just want to thank you for coming and speaking to us and bringing us your wisdom and your expertise. And thanks for being here, man, all morning.
Absolutely. I appreciate y'all having me.
Yeah, so can you tell us, just as a way of introduction, can you tell us a little bit about how you found yourself being a mental health professional, how you felt like led into that line of work?
Sure. So a big thing for me that kind of brought me into the mental health field was a lot of the loss that my own family had suffered a number of years ago. I was fortunate enough to have the love and support that was needed to ultimately get to a place of healing to such an extent that I feel a lot of other people don't really get to experience. And so I wanted to be somebody who could help in that regard specifically.
That's awesome. So from some of your pain and your trauma, you want to bring light and purpose out of that for other people, which is always such a beautiful story. So thanks for saying yes to that. I think that's a really awesome calling. Can you tell us a little bit, because you are a follower of Jesus, Right. That'd be an awkward thing to pull on you right now if you weren't.
Actually,
We've talked about this. But tell us a little bit about how your faith in Jesus, how it informs your work, how it's connected and integrated into your work as a mental health professional.
Sure. So my worldview affects everything, and that's the case for most of us. So as a mental health counselor, I try to look at people through the lens of God Himself. So God looks at us with love, with this absolutely unconditional, non-wavering love towards us. And in so doing, God is also able to provide us with the healing and recovery that we need. In counseling, that's one of the ways that He provides that, is we are able to come alongside somebody in their most vulnerable and most difficult time and help them to heal and process and recover. And my worldview, my view of the Lord has helped me to come alongside people in that way, to demonstrate to them unconditional positive regard, regardless of the extent to which, I agree with their political viewpoints or I see their situation the same way they do. They don't necessarily need that from me. They just need me to be there and to be present and to be someone who will help and assist in what they're going through. And my worldview has very much led me to perform in that way as a counselor.
That's awesome. So, a lot of what we've talked about the last couple of weeks as we've been in this series is this stigma that some religious people, some Christians or church people have with mental illness, with getting help for mental illness. Like some people are like, well, like nobody needs to talk to somebody who's a professional. We just need to like pray more, read the Bible more, that kind of thing. Have you heard that, and how do you respond to that?
Absolutely. So I know quite a few people who have that mindset, and it's understandable. Like I get it. I get where you're coming from, because we serve a God of power, infinite power, a God of love and God of healing. So it makes sense that we would kind of take that approach for wounds that we can't physically see. So if I get into a car accident, I have a protruding bone, nobody's going to be like, okay, well, let's go ahead and pray about that. Like we're gonna.
Not the first call. Like just get the prayer warriors together.
Right.
No, that's not really what happens.
At
first.
some point, hopefully within the next 5 seconds, I'm going to be rushed to the emergency room to get my leg looked at. But when it comes to mental illness, we can't see the wound to the same extent. And so out of a place of love, but also ignorance, kind of a combination of those two, we assume that there's only prayer that can actually heal and address mental illness. But the fact is, the Scripture does not support that. As we've seen with some of these people like Elijah and Jeremiah and Job, they had this very serious issue that they were dealing with because of trauma that they had experienced. They were experiencing a lot of depression over it. And the Bible later on describes Jesus Christ, God Almighty Himself in the flesh, as a man of sorrow, well acquainted with grief. He experienced depression. He experienced in the Garden of Gethsemane when he was sweating drops of blood over the torture he was about to experience. He was having a full-blown panic attack. Jesus Christ, who had perfect communion with God the Father, experienced mental illness because of His humanity. And the fact is, when we look at mental health from that perspective, like we normalize it, it doesn't negate the power of God by any means. But it does allow us to recognize that there are other modalities that God has provided us, just like surgery and physical therapy and other things, to actually address these issues. And it does not in any way or shape or form undermine our relationship with the Lord or God's power to seek mental health services when mental health services are needed, any more than it undermines God's power when we go to the emergency room over a traumatic physical injury. I would look at it from that perspective.
That's really helpful, man. Thanks for that. So as we're trying to identify, if we have struggled or are struggling with any of these mental illnesses, I think sometimes it's helpful to just delineate between just moderate things that everybody goes through, the life is hard stuff, and clinical issues. So can you help us identify the difference between just feeling sad, feeling blue for a day or two, and then what would be considered clinical depression, so that we can help delineate those things?
Absolutely. So the DSM-5, the Diagnostic and Statistics Manual, the big book of
that's what we go to sleep reading every night. No,
yes,
that's it.
If you have insomnia, pull out that book. That will cure it right away. But it's the big book of mental disorders, and the way that we usually categorize it is a timeline. So for a major depressive disorder, it's usually about 6 months. However, there's what they call unspecified depression, where basically you're having this issue with depression that is interfering with your life in some capacity. capacity. So for example, if your ability to perform at work or your ability to even get to work because you're so depressed, your relationships are suffering, you just don't have any motivation, you have a lack of energy, your hobbies are no longer fun or enjoyable for you, that's when we say that this is a clinical matter. This is clinical depression. However, when somebody goes through something, for example, lost loved ones or loss of a job, loss of relationship, sexual assault, all of these things, it makes sense perfectly for us to have some sort of emotional response to that. And so with kind of identifying the difference between the two, one is perfectly understandable. It's a normal human experience. But with depression, major depressive disorder, it's that exact same mindset. It's a human experience, but it has impacted you to such an extent that the rest of your life is now negatively affected. And that's when we say this is clinical depression. We need to do something about it.
That's really helpful. That's really helpful. When it starts to limit those things that we love and need to do to thrive, that's when we can say we're talking about a different animal.
Yes.
No way. Okay, so let's move a little bit to the practical side, the helpful side, the hopeful side. You might have been speaking right to someone's heart in their head about like, yeah, this is something that I'm struggling with right now, or I know someone who is struggling with this, or I was this way a couple months ago, or you're starting to be on the cusp of feeling that way. What are some like hopeful, practical things, steps you would give them, painting with a broad brush, to sort of like grow through their depression to feel whole again?
Sure. So there's a couple of things I would recommend. If somebody is experiencing depression, there's a number of ways that we could go about this. The first way is to do kind of a self-check-in where you kind of just evaluate, okay, what's going on with me? Why is this here? It kind of normalizes for yourself like, hey, I went through this really bad breakup. It makes sense that I would feel depressed right now, but this has been going on for 7-8 months. Maybe it's time for me to talk to somebody. So a self-check-in is one way. Another way is to evaluate and kind of think through traumatic experiences that you have been through that may be contributing to it. I come from the perspective that trauma explains just about all mental illness to some extent, but it's relative trauma. So it doesn't have to be physical, emotional, or sexual abuse. It could be, a major disappointment. It could be a car wreck. It could be just something that you were really hoping for that didn't come through. So we evaluate the trauma, we process, we work through, and we heal from it, and then the symptoms tend to go away with that. Another way is to do what they call opposite action. So depression tells us to stay at home. It tells us to avoid going to church even, stay away from our friends and family.
Netflix, Cheetos, pizza, Cheetos, like just lay down and do that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Neglecting your hygiene, like all of this stuff depression says to do. So when we take this mindset of doing the exact opposite, or essentially rebelling against what the depression says to do or not do, that is one of the most effective ways that we treat it, is we actually do things. We go hang out with family and friends even though we don't feel like doing it. We go take a shower even though we don't have the motivation or energy. We go exercise even though we really do not want to get to the gym. We do everything.
We go to church even when we don't feel like it.
We go to church.
I'll give you $5 right after.
Yeah, there we go. Yeah. Exactly. We do exactly what depression says not to do. And we don't do the things that depression says to do. That's one of the biggest things that we do.
So that opposite action thing is so powerful because I think we've all had those experiences where we just naturally are gravitated towards doing that isolating thing, that thing where it's just us. But what's hard is that the hope and the step forward is in that opposite action. To push through, to defiantly go against the grain is what's actually going to help us get out of the pit, which is such a powerful shift.
And it is, and it's so different from what's natural for us. Unfortunately, it's easy to get depressed. It's easy to stay at home and do nothing. It's easy to do all these things or to not do the things that we know we should be doing. But healthy, as we've seen, it takes work and it takes time. Usually when we engage in opposite action, we don't feel better right away. When we start to process trauma, we actually feel sometimes a little bit worse even because now we're reliving this in our mind. But as we go through that, we're able to heal and recover. Back in the day, before we had modern technologies, if somebody had a major wound, a major physical wound, one way that they would treat it is to actually burn the wound in order to avoid having to amputate. We don't have to resort to those methodologies anymore, thank God, but nonetheless, the mindset is that we sometimes have to go through those hard things in order to experience health and healing and happiness again. And it takes a lot of work and it takes time.
So, there are probably those among us that they struggle with depression, but I imagine, just statistically, that there's a large amount of people that are in the room this morning or joining us online that maybe for you don't know what that's like. Something at our church that I love is that we are not satisfied just to like know some things or just to come and sing the songs and feel a little bit better about ourselves. Like we want to be obsessed with partnering with God, like getting in the flow of what God's doing as he brings hope and healing and restoration to our world. We want to be a part of that. So with that in mind, Noah, how can we be that like faithful presence, that friend, that coworker, that family member to actually help those that are struggling with depression, going beyond just check out this video or here's this link from Sunday? How can we support those that are struggling with depression?
Absolutely. So resources are fantastic, but what we've noticed is that the most helpful and effective thing that a person can do to help somebody who is experiencing depression is to actually just come alongside and be there. Not passing any kind of judgment, not giving advice, not directing the person anyway, but just being physically present in and of itself gives that person that confidence that they have the support they need to heal and recover. It's kind of like if you have a tightrope walker and you put a net under the tightrope, that's going to give that person a lot more confidence to actually tackle that issue. But when it's gone, there's a lot more to deal with.
So more than just like sending the text message, more than just sharing the link, It's actually showing up is the power, right? I think that's so interesting because I remember growing up and taking God's name in vain was a big thing I was afraid of because I got scolded for saying G-O-D or things like that instead of G-O-S-H, whatever that might be. And I remember that, and I remember like being so terrified that I was going to take God's name in vain. But the older I get, the more challenging that call to like not take God's name in vain actually is, because maybe it's a lot less of just a certain word that comes out of our mouth, but when we like use God's name, but we don't actually do anything about it, and we like say, oh, I'm going to pray for you, but we don't even pray for them, or we just send a message and acting like we're going to do something, but we don't. I would contend that that's more like taking God's name in vain than even the other way around. So like being that embodied presence, not just a text, but showing up and getting our hands dirty, that is more like partnering with God than just sending the message and then saying we're going to pray for them and then, come on, let's be real, that kind of a thing, right? So like I think that's such a beautiful challenge as well.
It is.
Like, can you speak a little bit more about like just the power of that presence in people's lives that are struggling?
Absolutely. So it can't be underestimated. I'll actually share with you guys a story of kind of what I went through. So back in the summer of 2011, I was at basic training. I was in the Army for a little while. And I was about 3 months into training. And I was going to get ready to come home soon and graduate. And it was about 1 o'clock in the morning. I got woken up by the drill sergeant and taken over to the battalion headquarters. I did not know what I did to get in huge trouble, but I thought that I had done something to get into huge trouble, because you're not supposed to get woken up at 1 o'clock in the morning at that point and go over to that building. But he escorted me over there and he took me to the chaplain's office. And the chaplain sat me down in his office and he said, I'm just going to be straight with you. We got a Red Cross message. Your mother, your brother, and your sister have all died in a car accident today. You're going home. And so that was an absolute shock and awe on my entire system, on my entire world. I had no idea what in the world was going to happen, how the family was going to hold together, what I was going to do when I came home. Like I was at a complete and total loss and devastation. But what happened was when I came home, we had the funeral. My father, my siblings, my uncles and aunts, my cousins, my recruiter even, a very loving, kind man, my pastor, my counselor, my church community. I had all of this support in my life at the time that in and of itself was one of the most powerful things that happened to me that allowed me to heal and recover from this trauma. And had that not been there, had that not been the case, had those people not been available to me and just been with me, experiencing the situation with me, my spiral could have been significant. That could have completely changed even my life trajectory had it not been for those people being there. So even though we weren't really doing anything, we did like we went out to eat together. It was still summertime, so we still went to the beach. We still did the things, but we weren't really talking about what we were going to do going forward. We were just together. That, far and away, more than anything else, had the biggest impact on my healing and recovery. And we see how big an impact that just being present can be for somebody. You do not have to advice give. You do not have to have the perfect quote that they just like, I get that. That resonates with me. It can just be you being present and just being with the person in and of itself shows them that they have love, that they have support, and that they have the means to actually heal and recover from what's going on with them.
Wow, thanks so much. Thanks so much for your vulnerability and sharing that too. And thanks for the way you serve our community. Can we just thank Noah for being here today, man? We appreciate it. Yeah. All right. Well, a couple other things I wanted to leave us with just in a way of hope. Because I can't speak to the clinical realities the way that he can. But I want to share a little bit of hope for those of us that might be struggling with depression. I want you to know this. I want this to seep down into your soul a little bit this morning. But I want you to know that your emotions of hopelessness, your emotions that lead to depression, they're valid, but they're not permanent. We don't need to act like nothing's there. They're real. They're valid. We want you to actually be able to bring those to the surface. But I want to encourage you that they are not permanent. Deep-seated Christian hope is in this reality, that the worst things are never the last things. That everything sad is in process of becoming untrue. I want you to be able to believe that, to go through your depression, to process through to the other side, because it's not permanent. Those feelings, they are not permanent to who you are and the story that you have. And we see this with all three of the characters that we looked at, the people from the Hebrew Scriptures this morning. For example, we see Elijah, who was depressed under the broom bush. We know that this is true. That all at once, the very next verses, all at once an angel touched him and said, "Get up and eat." He looked around, and there by his head was some bread baked over hot coals and a jar of water. He ate and drank and then laid down again. He got himself some food and some water and got to rest. I saw this one tweet that was really helpful in interpreting this. This is your gentle reminder that one time in the Bible, Elijah was like, "God, I'm so mad, I want to die." So God said, "Here's some food. Why don't you have a nap?" So Elijah slept, ate, and decided things weren't so bad. Never underestimate the spiritual power of a nap and a snack. Can I get an amen? Come on, right? Don't underestimate it. Sometimes it's just in that self-care that we can get. We just need to take care of ourselves. We know that Job went through his depression to the other side, to where after 35 chapters of him bemoaning and crying out and lamenting to God about all of his loss, we see at the very end of the book of Job, Job coming to a different understanding, a different knowledge, a different wisdom. He says, "I know that you can do all things. No purpose of yours can be thwarted. You asked, who is that obscures my plans without knowledge? Surely I spoke of things I did not understand, things too wonderful for me to know." The word know there is not just a mental, intellectual discovery. It's the word yada, which means an experiential knowing. It's like wisdom and knowledge of I've been through this and now I understand in a deep level that you are powerful. And his relationship with God was different on the other side because he knew God in a new, bigger way. Jeremiah, who was sitting there hopeless after the trauma he's experienced with the temple in Jerusalem. In Lamentations, near the end of that poetry of the most emo, sad stuff that you find in the Bible, he says this about God. "Because of the Lord's great love, we are not consumed, for his compassions never fail. They are new every morning. Great is your faithfulness." This is hope going through depression, not negating it, but going through to the other side. He realizes it's not permanent. That phrase, Lord's great love, is the Hebrew word hesed, which is hard to translate. It's like this unfailing, never stopping, chasing us down love from God. And that word compassion, it's interesting. We always hear compassion like, I'll have compassion on them, like we have sympathy. But the word compassion has its root in the Hebrew word rakah, which means a womb. It's a mother's womb, a protective love around somebody. And Jeremiah, on the other side, found God to be that protective presence in his life, that rakam, that womb. So know that those feelings are valid, but they are not permanent. And I want to encourage you with this. If you're struggling, if you've ever struggled with suicidal ideation and just thinking like you want to end it all, please hear me when I say this next thing. Do not make permanent decisions based on temporary emotions. Please, do not make permanent decisions based on temporary emotions. You are so valuable. You are so loved. You are cherished. It can get better. So do not make a permanent decision based on a temporary emotion, because there is hope on the other side. I want you to hear that and believe that. And one way we want to help you make that opposite action is by encouraging you to do this, to reach out for help. Reach out for help, to talk to your doctor. And maybe for you, it's medication. And there's a stigma around medication inside of churches as well. And I want to speak the counter story to that as well. Like, man, what a gift that we can live in a period of human history where there can be pharmaceuticals that can help us get through bouts and seasons of depression. What a gift from God. And so if that's you, I encourage you to speak to your doctor about it, to see if there's something that can start making your life more manageable, if that can help you. So do not feel any shame about that, but we can thank God that we live in a time where there are these things that can help us maybe get through those seasons to where we can thrive again. Another way we want to encourage you to reach out for help, we have this website for the series, bridgewaykokomo.com/mental matters. You can scan that QR code and save it as well. But we have a landing page there where we have a list of vetted mental health professionals in our community that Noah is a part of, Kate from last week is a part of, some other people that are a part of our church here at Bridgeway that are mental health professionals are a part of as well. And we want to encourage you to reach out to them, try to schedule something with them, to find help in talking to them. But we also have a link there for mental health coaches. We have a team of 4 or 5 people in our church that have gone through this training to become coaches, sort of a mental health triage, a first responders kind of thing if you have a long wait at these professionals' office. And there are people that are there to listen to you and help you take some next steps as well. So we already had 2 people sign up for that last week, which was an awesome, awesome thing. So we want this to be a resource not just for our church, but for our entire community. So hear me. Reach out for help. Do not do this alone. Do not make any permanent decisions based off of temporary emotions. There is hope. And hear me if I haven't said this enough. You are not alone, and you don't need to stay silent about this anymore because God is there with you in the pit. He's there with you, and he knows the way out.